Hello, everyone. We are going to start our meeting in a minute or two. We're waiting for folks to continue to log in and then we'll get started. So, buenas tardes a todos. Gracias por estar con nosotros hoy. Vamos a darles a todos un momento antes de comenzar esta junta. Gracias por estar aquí con nosotros. All right, folks. Welcome, everyone. I want to first take a moment to share the Zoom interpretation instructions. Antes de comenzar, voy a compartir las instrucciones para acceder a los servicios de interpretación. Voy a hacer esto primero en español y luego en inglés. Good evening, everyone. I am going to share the interpretation instructions, first in Spanish, then in English. Para las personas que nos acompañan hoy a través de su tableta o de su iPad o de su teléfono inteligente o smartphone, favor de localizar el menú en forma de tres puntos en la parte inferior de su pantalla. De ahí pueden seleccionar Language Interpretation o interpretación del lenguaje enseguida. Pueden seleccionar su idioma, en este caso el español o Spanish. Para todas las personas que nos acompañan a través de su computadora, pueden localizar el símbolo de interpretación en forma de globo en la parte inferior de su pantalla. Hagan clic ahí y después elijan su lenguaje en español o Spanish. Ahora voy a dar las instrucciones en inglés. Here are the instructions in English for all those joining us tonight through their tablets or iPads or through their smartphones. Please locate the menu in the form of three dots on your screen. You can click there, then select Language Interpretation, and then select language of your choice. In this case, it would be English. If you're joining us through your computer, you can locate the icon in the form of a globe for interpretation at the bottom of your screen. You can click there, then select English as your language of choice. And we can go on to the next slide. So before moving on, I do want to highlight a few features that we'll be using within Zoom. I want to particularly highlight the Q&A feature, which we'll be using today to be gathering feedback and comments throughout the presentation. There will be moments in the meeting we'll be stopping, pausing, and then getting your questions answered. If folks are having issues with Zoom or any of the tools that we'll be using today, please do send a message to our team. Juan, tech support should be listed in your screen. If you have any issues, please do send a message to Juan. Juan will help you figure anything out. So, with that, I'm actually going to pass it over to Carrie, who's going to give us a welcome from the city. So, Carrie.
Thank you, Christian, and good evening, Costa Mesa. My name is Carrie Tai, the Economic and Development Services Director for the City of Costa Mesa. Welcome to round two of the Neighborhoods Where We All Belong workshops. For those that joined us in round one last fall, welcome back, and it is a pleasure to see you again. And for those that are new, welcome. Neighborhoods Where We All Belong is the city's initiative to bring to reality opportunities for housing development along many corridors that currently only have non-residential development, like commercial development, for example. And as someone who lives and uses the city, you are part of this initiative and part of this story. So we are pleased that you've joined us tonight to refine the plans on what development might look like along these corridors. Let's see here. Just trying to make sure we've got our participants. Okay. And then I would also, before we start, I would like to thank particularly the staff from our Economic and Development Services Department, Michelle Halligan and Anna McGill, in particular, also representatives from the City Manager's Office, and then also Dudek, the city's consultant, for this extensive teamwork leading up to this moment. So tonight we look forward to discussing with you the plans on bringing to life more housing opportunities in the city. And with that, I will turn this back to Christian. Thank you, Christian.
Thank you, Carrie. So we'll move on to the next slide. So quick recap of the purpose of today's workshop. So the first thing is we want to continue that community visioning process. We'll make sure that that is a ongoing conversation. Some folks might have been there this past week, but we want to make sure that we're continuing that same information. We also want to be sharing some of the preliminary zoning regulations. So you'll be seeing a number of presentations. We'll be covering that topic. And then finally, and importantly, is inviting your public input and discussion. So as we noted at the beginning, we'll be using the Q&A feature to gather questions from folks. We'll be answering those questions at different points in the meeting today. And then we'll be also using another tool that we'll talk through in a minute, which is Mentimeter. So hopefully folks have used that tool before. We'll be sharing a few different polls throughout the presentation, gathering some quick ideas, quick thoughts on some different topics. So I'm going to move on to the next slide. So, quick guide to a productive workshop. So the first thing we want to do is thank you for being here with us today. It is a late meeting, so we know that folks have a lot of stuff going on. We know that you're choosing us over a lot of other things, so we appreciate you being here with us. But the first thing is we want to make sure that we're one, keeping in mind that all perspectives are valued. We know that there are different perspectives, thoughts on some of the different topics that we'll be covering today. So just being mindful that all perspectives are valued. We want to make sure that we're listening to understand, that we allow room for others, that we respect differences, and that we focus on the future. And then as a quick note, the meeting is being recorded. The recording itself will be posted on the city website. So that's just a quick reminder as well. So I noted that we'll be using Mentimeter for today's meeting. So for folks that have not used Mentimeter, is an online polling system. You do not need to download anything on your phone or computer. It is something that you use on your phone or on your laptop. To access Mentimeter itself, you have a couple different ways to access it. One, you can take out your phone, scan that QR code on the right. If you scan that, that's going to take you right into the poll itself. You'll be able to participate throughout the whole meeting. The other way you can do that is by accessing the website. So if you go to menti.com and then insert that code at the bottom of the number, which is 21627513, you'll be able to also log into the poll. We have one test poll question to get us started today, which is, have you attended any of the previous community workshops or activities for this process? So we do see that some folks are logging on, so we'll give folks a few minutes to log on. Again, we'll be using this tool throughout the presentation, asking questions, getting some interactive feedback from you. So we're seeing a little bit of a split right now of 2 and 2. I also see that some other folks are logging on. So maybe we'll stay here for another second before we move on. So again, you can log on in different ways. You can log on using the QR code. You can do the website as well. And then the final kind of option, if you're like, I don't want to work with Mentimeter, I just want to provide my comments. You could also use a chat. If you are familiar with the Zoom chat, you can also drop in your comments there and feedback. So for each of these different activities, we'll kind of pause, take a moment, gather your thoughts, and then move on. So I think we can maybe move on from this. So with that, I'm actually going to pass it over to Michelle. Michelle from the city is going to talk through a little bit of an overview of what we've done, where we're at. So Michelle, over to you. And Michelle, you are muted, so
Great. Thank you for
we can hear
unmuting
you.
me.
Perfect. Thank you, Michelle. All right,
Hi,
over to you.
everyone. I'm Michelle Halligan, Senior Planner with the City of Costa Mesa and the Project Manager for Neighborhoods Where We All Belong. I'd like to provide a little background information, especially since some of us are new to the effort. Neighborhoods Where We All Belong is the City of Costa Mesa's name for a variety of actions to implement our housing element. The housing element is a state-mandated chapter of the city's general plan. It addresses local housing needs and includes programs to meet state requirements, all related to housing. So Neighborhoods Where We All Belong also implements Measure K, an approved local ballot measure that allows the city to rezone specific sites to create more housing opportunities without additional citywide votes. One of the requirements of Measure K is community visioning, including this workshop. Next slide. So neighborhoods where we all belong can generally be grouped into two categories. The first is housing development opportunities, which includes the rezoning of housing element sites and Measure K sites in order to allow more housing and even mixed-use development. The second category is zoning code amendments. These are various updates to the city zoning code to comply with state law and streamline housing project processing. Next slide. This map shows where new housing will be allowed and encouraged. All of the properties shown in a mint type color are within the Measure K boundary. This includes our housing element sites, which are outlined in red. The Measure K sites and housing element sites are all on commercial and industrial lands. The city needs to apply new standards to allow housing on those properties. Note that a finalized list of housing element sites is still pending. And for a more detailed view of the map, please visit our project website. Next. As previously mentioned, this is the second round of outreach for neighborhoods where we all belong. The first round of community visioning took place last July through October. There were workshops, pop-up events, stakeholder-focused discussions, a survey, and more. So thank you to the over 500 people who participated in the first round. We heard from so many members of the community that there's a strong desire to make Costa Mesa even better. Participants wanted more housing options, improved quality and affordability of housing, and several design-related features that they felt would help create really good neighborhoods. A detailed summary of that input is also available on the project website. So now I'd like to go back to Christian to help explain how to submit some questions in this online format.
Yes. So folks should be able to see this tool at the very bottom of your Zoom. Sometimes it's going to be located under the three dots where it says more. If you click that, you'll see that tool, the Q&A tool. So we do have that pod open. I want to see if there are any questions for Michelle on what she just covered. And if folks are having issues with accessing the pod, do let us know, and we can definitely address that with you individually. So I'm looking at the Q&A pod. I'm not seeing any questions coming in yet. So maybe we'll stay here for a second or two, and then if not, then we'll keep going. And again, we'll be revisiting questions throughout the meeting itself. So if something comes up, do add it on there or in the chat, and we'll make sure to answer that in the presentation. So Michelle, I'm not seeing anything, so I think we are gonna keep moving. So don't see anything on chat. So with that, actually, and thank you, Michelle, we're gonna pass it over to Kathy. Kathy is here with the DUDEC team. Kathy is gonna walk us through a number of presentations. Each of them are gonna be, we'll have a bookend in terms of some interactive activities and questions for you. So kind of be ready on Mentimeter because we are gonna get some fun questions over to you. So Kathy, passing it off to you.
Great. Thanks, Christian. And thanks, Michelle, for that overview of neighborhoods where we all belong. Hi, everyone. My name is Kathy Tangsayas, and I lead the consultant team, which is helping the city with this effort. I'm now going to share with you the preliminary zoning regulations, which we're categorizing into three buckets that you see here on the screen. The orange bucket is the mixed use overlay district, what we're calling the MOOD. The blue bucket are objective design standards. And then the yellow one are zoning code amendments. So let's get into it next. We'll first start with the mixed use overlay district, or the MOOD. Next. So the mixed use overlay district is the primary means of how the city is rezoning all of the Measure K sites. The MOOD is an overlay. It's a zoning overlay, which means that it provides additional optional regulations on top of or in addition to a property's existing base zoning. So that means that a property can continue to exist as it is today, or it can be redeveloped as it's allowed to today, or if and when it chooses to, it can opt into the overlay to develop housing or mixed use. Note that housing elements are exempt from this optional provision. And this is in essence to comply with state law. So that means that if and when a housing element site is redeveloped, it doesn't have the option to use the mood. It must use the mood, meaning it must be redeveloped as housing or as mixed use. Next. The mood will allow both 100% residential projects, so meaning housing only, in addition to mixed use of residential with commercial. And the mood will regulate these projects across a variety of topics. So density, setbacks, uses, open space, et cetera, all to be able to ensure that we're achieving a few goals like promoting a variety of housing types, creating vibrant neighborhoods, ensuring compatibility with adjacent development, et cetera. So tonight, we'd like to share with you some preliminary ideas on a few of these topics. Next. The first topic is permitted uses. The mood will allow a variety of uses in a mixed use format that are meant to be complementary to residential uses. So again, to allow for vibrant neighborhoods. We've listed some preliminary uses that we're considering here. So retail and restaurants, like stores and markets, cafes and other services, offices and workplaces for business and professional services, hotels and motels, possibly with small built-in convention spaces, arts and entertainment uses like bars and movie theaters, arcades, etc. Family or social services like senior facilities or daycares, medical uses like clinics, dental offices, spas, indoor recreation uses like gyms, fitness centers, indoor play areas, or you can tell us of other uses that we maybe have missed or thoughts in general about the uses. So with that, we can go to our first interactive question where you can let us know your thoughts. So Christian, back to you.
Kathy. So again, we have our Mentimeter instructions on screen. So we have the QR code, our project or Mentimeter code as well, which is the 21627513. If you already logged on for that first question that we had at the beginning of the meeting, you just need to stay on the same page, and then you should be able to then respond to the question itself. So we see that 12 folks are already logged on to the system, and then in here now you should be able to see or have the ability to then choose between the different options. And then Juan from our team has also added the same question in Spanish for folks that are using interpretation for today's meeting.
And for folks that have thoughts about the other category, we'll switch over to a slide in just a second where you can input that, some of those ideas for other.
Thank you, Kathy. And while folks are selecting the uses that should be allowed in the mood, if folks do have questions, again, just as a reminder, we are taking questions via the Q&A pod. You can access that via clicking more, and then you should be able to see the Q&A feature on your settings. If you do not see that, you can also submit your questions via chat. The chat should be enabled so that you should be able to send questions directly to the host, so to our team, and we'll be able to take those questions as well and then document them as well. So just as a quick reminder. So going back to the Mentimeter and seeing folks, we have almost half of the participants per response. So we're seeing arts and entertainment as the item that's popping up the most, and then we have a pretty even distribution across some of the other items. So I do see that there is one as other, so maybe Kathy, let's move on to the next so we can see, ask folks of what is that other. So if folks are thinking about other uses, definitely add them here. We'll be able to see those roll in as we're in responses.
Yeah, so here you can input a completely different use that maybe we didn't catch in those categories, or you can type in your thoughts in general. For example, in the votes that we just saw, there was a lot of love for the arts and entertainment, not so much love for the hotels and motels. So we're curious if you have more thoughts to share on that, we will gladly take them.
So we'll stay here and see. And I think we only had one person selecting other. So we'll see if that person can add what they were thinking about. before we move on. So not gonna put any pressure on that person, but it'd be great to hear what they were thinking in terms of others. Okay, cool. So we see a response to community meeting place, room for weddings, etc. Okay, awesome.
Okay.
That's good to hear. Seeing another one, batting cages, mini golf. Okay. Um, we'll see if other ideas are coming up. Community resources, community gardens. Okay. So we'll see if anything else comes up. And if not, then we'll keep going. Awesome. Okay, I think we can keep going. So Kathy, I'm gonna hand it back over to you.
Excellent. Thank you. This is a pretty cool tool, guys. So hopefully it's not too difficult to use. Like I said, or like Christian said before, your input is being noted, right? Whether you're doing it on Mentimeter or you're typing it into the chat. And all of this input, not just tonight, but the other events that we're hosting this week, all of that input is going to be used so that we can help refine the zoning regulations. All right, so let's move on to the next topic, which is density. So the mood will also regulate how much residential density and corresponding building height will be allowed. For those of you that don't know, density is a measure of population. So it's usually numbers of persons or people per area or dwelling units per area. And it's often calculated as DUs per acre or dwelling units per acre, which means that if the number is lower, that means that there are less number of dwelling units in an acre, and the higher the number, then the more number of dwelling units per acre. This usually correlates to a building type, so it's sort of the scale that you see here on the screen. So on the lower end of the spectrum are buildings like just houses or townhomes. And then on the right, on the higher end of the spectrum, you'll see more multifamily buildings, so stacked flats or stacked dwelling units. But we want you to note that density can be tricky. So a higher number doesn't necessarily mean it's a bigger and taller building. There's so many factors that go into play. So factors like the size of the unit or the design of the building can really affect how density is perceived. So you'd be surprised sometimes to find two similar looking buildings, similar in height, with actually very different densities. So that said, design really becomes important here. So design becomes critical to ensure that new buildings, no matter the density, are integrated as best as possible into the community. Next. So in the mood, we're considering a variety of densities depending on the neighborhood in the city. So for example, in the west side, which you'll see on the bottom of the map here on the left in sort of the green colors, that maximum allowed density would be a lot lower than, say, in North Costa Mesa, which is at the top of the map in the blue. Generally, we're looking at about 30 to 60 DUs per acre, so dwelling units to the acre across the city. We're trying to stay somewhat complementary, not exceeding, but complementary to what's being identified in the housing element. But note that housing element sites have their own set density. So these were established as part of the housing element process back in 2022, and that was as a way to comply with state law. And as Michelle mentioned earlier, a finalized list of housing element sites is still pending. But regardless of density, the mood will allow a maximum building height of either 72 feet for non-housing element sites or 108 feet for housing element sites. Next. And despite the maximum densities, despite the maximum building heights, the ultimate look and feel of the buildings, of the projects, will depend on a variety of factors like the size and shape of the lot, the building type, or even the location in the city. So we've provided a few sketches here, a couple sketches to help you visualize what that could look like. So next. So on the left, for example, along Harbor, an existing, oops, we skipped one, an existing strip mall strip retail uses could give way to, let's say, a 3-story building with a ground floor restaurant maybe, and then lofts above. So on the left here along Harbor, this could equate to 30 dwelling units per acre. As another example, on the right in North Costa Mesa, here the parcels are a lot larger. So for example, an existing office building could give way to a 5-story building. So with ground floor retail and then units stacked above, this would equate to 60 DUs per acre. Next. And if folks have any comments on the density, again, we'll gladly take your comments in the chat, but we're going to keep moving on here to the next topic. So the next topic is commercial floor area ratio, or FAR. So the mood will also regulate, in addition to residential, the mood will regulate how much commercial space will be allowed. So again, these are for mixed use projects. FAR is a measure of floor area relative to site area. So in the mood, we're considering limiting commercial uses to a maximum of 1.0 FAR, meaning that the amount of commercial space cannot exceed the size of the site. In addition, we're also considering a minimum FAR, so meaning that the city could require some or all projects to provide at least some amount of commercial area. And we recognize that there are some considerations here. So on the one hand, we want to be realistic of market conditions, right? We know that retail is changing, how we shop is changing, and we recognize that there are some examples, unfortunately, of mixed use projects, around the region where ground floor retail stays vacant for some time. So we want to be mindful of market feasibility and not require something that will ultimately be hard to lease or expensive to build, or maybe even, degrade our neighborhoods. But on the other hand, we recognize that some commercial uses is actually a good thing, can be complementary to residential uses. It can be nice to have a coffee shop or a corner market just below your doorstep or around the corner. And so these sorts of uses, in some instances, may make sense when there is sort of that foot traffic. So with those considerations in mind, let's go to our next interactive question. So Christian, I'll hand it back to you.
Yes. So the next question that we have for folks, again, Mentimeter instructions on screen. So QR code for the website with the number there as well. If you've logged on, you'll stay logged on. But the question that we have now is, should commercial spaces be required for all mood projects? So we'll ask you to select one. So we have a number of different options listed on screen. So we'll give folks a few seconds to answer. So, and I can read these off really quickly. So every project should be required to provide some commercial space. Let the property owner decide when commercial space uses are appropriate. Only require projects doing major streets to provide commercial uses. Only require projects of a larger size to provide commercial uses, or other. Let us know on the next slide. So again, if there are any other thoughts, once we move on, we'll have a little bit of a catch-all for those other thoughts. And as a reminder, if you are not able to engage with Mentimeter, the chat settings should be enabled, that you can chat our hosts and co-hosts for this meeting, the project team. So if you have thoughts, feedback on any of these questions and want us to send them that way, do send us a chat. Our team will be documenting all that on the back end as well. So do know that those questions are being tracked and documented. So Kathy, we're seeing that the majority are leaning towards letting property owners decide when commercial uses are appropriate. So that seems to be the overarching response. And yeah, we see one more going that way.
Good to know. Christian, I see that a few people just joined. I don't know if you could quickly maybe provide
Yes.
a
Oh, and I think I might have lost some folks, but um, sharing the Mentimeter instructions again. So we are using Mentimeter, which is an online polling platform. You can use Mentimeter by using the QR code on your phone, or actually using logging on to menti.com. And once you log onto the website, then inserting that code that you see right under that number, which is 21627513. Once you're logged on, you should be able to respond to any of the questions that we're going to be answering as part of this. And Kathy, I think we lost her for a second.
Yeah, it looks like she's froze, so she's going to reconnect
Okay,
momentarily.
no worries.
you can transition to the next Mentimeter slide.
Yes, if we want to move on, and I think the next one is our catch-all again. So, again, if there are any other thoughts on that question, I don't think we had any other responses here. So we'll see. Folks have any thoughts here. And I think we'll wait for a second, I think, for Kathy to rejoin us. And team, if we see Kathy, let me know. And Michelle, I'm gonna toss something to you right now.
Sure.
So I'm seeing a question coming in, which is, can we do another quick recap of the moods of mixed use overlay district? Can you give us the synopsis, I think, for some of the folks that have logged on a little bit later in the meeting?
Yeah. Okay, so let's see here. Let me go back a few slides. So the mixed use overlay district is actually an existing district in Costa Mesa. What we're proposing to do is to create a new section of it that would apply just to our housing element sites, because those have specific densities that we need to achieve to be in compliance with state law. But we're also looking at creating a new section of the mixed use overlay district that would apply to our Measure K sites. And so that's the area where we've got a lot of room to play around with, and we really want to hear from the public about what they want to see there in terms of allowable uses. So mixed use means it could be vertically integrated into one structure, or it could be horizontal where the uses are side by side on a parcel. We're also interested in knowing, do you want to require commercial in a mixed use setting, or do you want to leave it up to the property owner and the developer? We're very interested in knowing like what parts of design are important to you as well. So the mixed use overlay district will serve as the overall like design regulations and development regulations that an owner of a Measure K site could opt into in the future.
Thank you, Michelle. And it looks like we have Kathy back.
Oh, good.
I am
Kathy,
so
sorry we lost you for a
sorry.
minute. We lost you for a minute, but
I am back.
we did have a question, I think,
Yeah.
I think serves everyone, which is a little bit of a recap of when we're talking about mood and we're asking these questions, what are we talking about? So Michelle just gave us a good overview again of mood itself, and when we're talking about that, what is the implication that comes with that versus Measure K sites as well. So it's a little bit of that combination. So going back to Mentimeter, looking at some of the responses that came in the minute. So it seemed that one of the responses let owners decide, and I think that was the category that we already had included in there. The other that I'm seeing is incentives for local businesses to stay in Costa Mesa. Let owners decide, and then loaners decide. So it seems like that's a repeat, but we definitely captured that as part of the prior poll. So I think we can move forward. And then I see a general question, I think, as well listed in there. How does parking get affected if commercial space is required? So we'll note that, and I think potentially, I think, Kathy, we can talk about that in a minute.
Yeah.
And the last question, I think, before we move on, is just, or note itself is, don't build so high that the shadows cover harbor like they do in Irvine. So building height a little bit being considered there. So I'm going to ask our team to move us forward on our deck. And I think we'll be moving into our Q&A pod. So
Oh, I think we have a couple
one more
more
section.
topics.
Yeah.
Okay, so the next topic is setbacks. So the mood will also regulate the distances or the separational distances that buildings should be set back or separate from either the street or the property line or other buildings. This is generally as a way to ensure safety, privacy, light and air, as well as accessibility. So in the mood, we're considering setbacks that will allow for flexibility in a few ways. So for example, a front setback. Here we're allowing the setback of a certain size to allow for the potential of wider sidewalks, street trees, for example, along streets, enough room for outdoor dining or shopping when there is a commercial use on the floor. Or in the case of just residential uses, maybe generous porches or stoops for units to be able to be protected from the street. Next, and then in special conditions, we're considering setbacks to. Can we go to the next one? In special conditions, we're considering setbacks to mitigate potential issues. So, for example, when there's a mixed-use project abutting a single-family house, or a residential project abutting an industrial use, in these cases, more generous setbacks and landscaping in those setbacks will be required. All right, next. This is, I think, the last topic in the mood, open space. So the mood will also regulate how much and what kinds of open space will be required in projects. So depending on the size and the type of projects, they will be required to provide up to 3 kinds of open space. So private, common, or publicly accessible. Private open space are the kinds of open space that are dedicated to individually to a dwelling unit. So like a balcony, a porch, a terrace, or even a backyard. Common open space is the kind of open space that is shared by tenants in a building. So think of it as courtyards or maybe even small parks or garden or play areas for tenants. And then publicly accessible open space, these are for much larger projects, much more public projects. So large plazas, courtyards, or parks that are used and accessible by the general public. So not just the tenants in the building. We've been hearing a lot from folks, a desire for more open space in Costa Mesa. So while these spaces are not public, they're not public parks or public recreational facilities, meaning owned by the city, the inclusion of these types of open spaces in projects will help to fill the gap, especially when it comes to kids and families and seniors and really everyone in and around these projects. So that said, we want to hear from you. What kind of open space is more important and should be prioritized more? So I'll hand it back to Christian for our next interactive question.
Thank you, Kathy. So, 13.2, move sort of Mentimeter. So our question is listed as, should the mood require more private or common open space or vice versa? So Kathy shared the 3 different examples. We want to hear your thoughts on your preference. So you'll see the 3 different options listed. So we have more common open space, more private open space, and then option for other again. So if you have other thoughts in terms of when it comes to the conversation of open space, do let us know. So and then I'll do another quick reminder of Mentimeter again. You have QR code or website, and then if you're not using Mentimeter and you still want to provide your feedback, if you use a Q&A pod, you can use a chat. We're grabbing all those questions on the back end as well, so we're seeing your feedback coming in live as well. So I am for this one, Kathy. I've seen a lot of other, so
Okay.
I think
Yeah, and
we'll see what folks are thinking. So just for those folks that are clicking other, I think get ready to submit a little bit of a quick response on what other things you're thinking about.
yeah, I know this topic is really important to the community in Costa Mesa. So we have some thoughts on how to regulate this, following best practices and what we see in the market generally today and given the needs of the community. But we really do want to hear from folks on this one. So curious to see what people say.
Yeah, so I think we'll give folks another second. I want to make sure that we're also getting some of that feedback for those first 2 categories. But from those 2 categories, it seems that more common open space seems to be slightly just ahead of the more private open spaces. So I think we're at a good moment to maybe move on to that other. So for those folks that did click other, let us know what are you thinking? What are the other ideas that are coming to mind? And I think as Kathy said, um, we know this is important, so I think getting your thoughts is really helpful here. So we'll give folks a second to type in their thoughts. before we move on? Okay, so I'm going to read some of these off as they're coming in. So the first thing that I'm seeing is walking and biking trails, community garden space, more public open space. We need more parks, open public green space. Let's see what else comes in.
Yeah, and just for folks, just as a reference for folks, know that we're going to be getting down pretty detailed as much as we can in terms of regulating open space. So, for example, um, maybe getting into the weeds of whether it's, landscape versus not landscape. I know there are different definitions for open space and how they can be used or programmed. So, depending on the project or depending on the type of units, depending on the uses, we would like to provide regulations that really, address people's needs in this case.
Cool. So I'm looking at some other responses coming in. So seeing areas to dine and play with water features, think Fashion Island, Irvine Spectrum, more bike lanes. I think I would like to see more common space, private open space is important too, but to lean towards requiring a mix the larger build gets. Um, and then I'm seeing one question, I'll read that in a moment, which is, do you have data to help us decide in comments? So I think, Kathy, maybe that's a little bit more of what happens next, I think, with that like iteration
Yeah,
and
I
deeper
I
dive
could
into
maybe
it.
say something very brief to that right now. So one of the things that we've noticed in our analysis of Costa Mesa is that maybe some of the more recent projects in the mixed use overlay district today aren't providing enough open space. We've been hearing that a lot from folks, and we've been seeing that in projects. And so we want to be mindful to maybe change that requirement or up that requirement. But we do see a definite gap there, is that there just isn't enough, or sometimes even at all.
I'm going to read a few more and just know that even if I don't read it, we're capturing all this as well. So looking to see another response, place for my kids, pool, playground, etc. Plazas and gathering spaces for everyone would be great. Places to sit or more color. More walking and biking trails. I think we read that one already. One is else, and then I do see another one's a little bit more technical, which is 20-foot setbacks for all three. So.
Someone noted here an example like Fashion Island and
Yeah.
Irvine Spectrum. That would be the kind of publicly accessible open space. So not private to a dwelling unit and not common to just the tenants, but public. So public meaning open and accessible to the general public. Those we're leaning towards requiring of much larger projects and probably with very busy commercial uses. So you probably won't see that in just a like a standalone residential project, but definitely in a larger mixed use project.
Thank you, Kathy. So I think we can move on to the next question, which is a little bit of a catch-all as well. So I think we've been noting that we are using the Q&A pod. So I'm going to ask Taylor if you can move us one forward. So I think we talked about gathering other questions. I do see at least one question that's come in the Q&A pod. I think some other questions have been submitted via the chat, but we do want to take a moment just to see if there are other questions that folks are thinking about. Do use a Q&A pod. You should be able to access that. Either it's going to be on your bottom of your screen, or you might have to click more, and then that should pop up menu, and you'll be able to see that Q&A icon, so you can see it on screen right now. But if you don't, also feel free to use the chat. So I do see a comment, Kathy, in the chat regarding building height. I think it was more of a comment, less of a question. And then I believe there was another question regarding what are the number of floors associated with the heights of various buildings?
I think I can answer that one. So generally, it depends, right? The number of feet that's associated with the floor. So ground floor retail, for example, will be a lot taller than, say, a residential floor. So, but typically we use a general rule of thumb of about 12 feet floor to floor. And that helps us to kind of estimate the total built height. But the maximum heights that we're considering in the mood For housing element sites, for example, that one is directly tied to the requirements that the city needs to comply with the state. So given the densities that have been identified in the housing element, the building heights need to correspond to that. For non-housing element sites, so just the regular Measure K sites, those would also be correlated to the densities, but again, those densities aren't going as high as the measure as the excuse me the housing element sites. So in a gist, about 12 feet or so per floor, and generally also being consistent with state law.
Yeah, I just think it's Michelle here with the City of Costa Mesa. I just want to reiterate that key point that with our housing element sites, we have an obligation to meet certain density minimums. And with our Measure K sites that aren't within the housing element, there's a lot more flexibility for the city to create new regulations.
Thank you, Michelle. So I'm looking at our Q&A pod. I'm not seeing any other questions. I'm going to ask our team to see if anyone's received any other questions from participants. To let me know, but if not, then we might be able to move on to our next item, which is objective design standards.
Awesome. All right.
Cool.
So objective design standards. Let's go to the next one. So objective design standards are essentially design-based regulations. They will regulate the look and the feel of new multifamily residential and mixed-use developments. And this is going to be applicable citywide, so not just within the mood. And the reason for these standards is just to provide a more straightforward, a more objective basis for both designing and developing projects in the city. So no more will be the use of subjective language, language that can be interpreted in more than one way, or language that can't really be defined or measured. So objective design standards instead will help reduce confusion really on both sides of the table. On the applicant side, when they're designing and developing projects, as well as the city side when they're reviewing and approving. So all of that in the name of promoting good design and helping to make the development process a lot more straightforward. Next. So the objective design standards will be regulated in two categories. So building design and site design. Building design is like the shape and the form of the building itself, what happens to the facade in terms of windows and doors, what happens at the ground level, or addressing architectural style, for example. And then site design is considering, how is the site laid out? Where does parking go? What happens to utilities and equipment? And these two aspects of design matter a lot, so much that it often makes the difference between a project that feels right, functions right, and looks right, and then one that just absolutely does not. So, in fact, you could argue that design at this level is really important, really impactful, and definitely noticeable. So, with that, we want to hear from you. Which aspects of design do you believe we should be prioritizing? So, Christian, back to you.
Thank you, Kathy. So again, our Mentimeter instructions on screen, and then I'm going to ask our team to load up our Mentimeter. So you'll see a number of different options listed on screen. If you're on your phone, you'll be able to scroll through, select them, and then on your computer, it's going to be a little bit more kind of similar to what we're seeing on screen right now. So we'll give folks a few different or a few minutes, I think, to select. We know that there are a number of options listed. But yeah, let us know. We'll stop for a moment here and then we'll get some responses coming in.
So this question is about building design first. And what we're asking of folks is, of these categories that are listed here, which ones are important to you? Massing and form, like should we be getting down to the nitty-gritty of like requiring like facade breaks or step backs, as height of the building increases? For facade articulation, should we be promoting visual interest? For the ground floor, should the ground floor, be active and engaging? For architectural styles, should we allow, a variety of styles? For roofs, should roofs, vary from building to building? And then we have a catch-all for other.
And Kathy, I'm going to ask you, I'm going to put you on the spot for a moment, just for some clarification, I think, for folks that might not be familiar with the terms, but I guess for the first one, I think that the massing form can you explain that in a we see the example on screen. Oh, and I think Taylor can go back.
Yeah, but massing and form. So massing and form means um, really the shape and the mass of the building. So one of the things that we try to endeavor in design and planning is to not strive for these big, massive blocks. So especially when we're talking about density and height, we want to be able to visually break it down. So even if a building is on the large side, architecturally or design wise, how can we break it down? Like maybe it's one big mass that's broken down into five smaller masses. There's different methods of the articulation of the facade that can help you visually perceive the building to be smaller or multiple parts rather than one big part.
Yeah. And I'll do a quick plug for Saturday's meeting. Because I think we're doing a little bit more of a massing activity on Saturday as well for folks that are able to show up in person as well. So just a quick plug for those folks that want a little bit of a repeat of this information. I am seeing a note, I think, just from our team that I think they've updated the Mentimeter itself. You should be able to select more than one option now. You might need to refresh your phone or your screen, but folks should be able to select more than one. So we'll give folks a second. Then you select more than one, but looking at ground floor and then architecture style being kind of the most prominent responses as of now. And I do see some responses coming in, rolling in now, and I think we are continuing to match, I think, that same those top two selections there.
That's that's actually good to see the architectural styles because one of the things that we heard a lot in round one and that we continue to hear in round two is that Costa Mesa is just so eclectic, right? There's not like one particular style that is Costa Mesa. It's made up of so many different types of styles, and because of the neighborhoods are so different across the board, I think it would be a disservice to just the unique quality, the eclectic character of Costa Mesa to regulate or require one style. So I'm glad to see that in folks' responses.
So I'm seeing again one response and the other. I'm interested in seeing what folks are thinking. So I'm gonna ask Taylor if you can move us forward, and we'll see what are the other ideas that folks are thinking about. Are there other things that you're referencing, thinking about when it comes to building design?
And as folks are thinking here, I'll just say that we're trying to walk a fine line here. So we want to regulate just enough to ensure a minimum quality of design, but then we also want to stop ourselves short of not regulating too much. So we want to allow for architectural creativity. We want to allow for design flexibility. So what we're trying to do here is again regulate just enough but not so much where we're overbearing.
And then I'm seeing a note here for the first one. I think that someone's seeing the host. I think if you go to the view mode at the very top of your screen, you should be able to select presentation. So that pops up on your screen. And then I'm seeing a response, first four options. Next response is a variety of forms needs to be encouraged. Artistic and traditional design should be welcome. So thank you for that. And I think that's fallen into that line. I think, Kathy, I think as you're talking about architecture styles, the diversity that we are seeing in Costa Mesa. So I think we can move on. I think our next slide is another kind of catch-all of other questions that you might have regarding the topics that we just covered right now on the objective design standards. So
Well, actually,
again,
sorry,
yeah,
Christian, to interrupt. We do have one more question. So that question was about building design. Can we now ask the site design question?
yes, yeah, yes. If you can pull that up again, sorry.
So this one
Yeah.
is the other category that I mentioned. So we have building design as the first, and then site design is the second. So site design is everything but the building. So the pathways around the building, the landscaping around the building, how people walk and drive around the building, how equipment or other utilities are addressed around the building. So, we're trying to regulate across these categories. So site access and circulation, for example, like I think we're going to strive here to make this a human scaled, human focused project. So pedestrian connectivity being a priority. The second one, mechanical equipment. Some of this stuff can get really unsightly. So we'll be addressing that through regulations of how to conceal it or screen it. Parking. Projects will have parking. Projects will integrate parking. So, but how can that parking be designed in a way where it's not, the first thing that you see or the most important thing that you see? Open space, we talked about open space, but the objective design standards will address to address how to regulate certain kinds of plants, certain kinds of materials, things like that. And then trash, just like mechanical equipment, trash, recycling, and compost. Those will be other utility equipment pieces that we'll be regulating on site as well.
Looking at responses, I think it seems like site access and circulation is rising to the top, and I think open space, which is not surprising, I think, given the responses that we saw in the prior poll as well. So we'll stay here for another minute before we move on. And I am again seeing another other, so I'm looking forward to seeing what folks are thinking in terms of site design. What is other things that you're thinking about there? So, and as a reminder, if you cannot engage with Mentimeter, you can use a chat. You can also use a Q&A pod. Any way that you can share that information with us, we'd love to hear it. We'd love to get your ideas and feedback on these questions. So I think, Kathy, I think we're going to move on and we'll move on to that other category. We want to see if folks have other ideas. So I know we at least saw one person respond with the other. What are you thinking about when it comes to site design? How should we best site design be regulated? And we'll see if we get a response here.
I'll say that this is a pretty neat tool, Christian. The fact that people can live input their responses and their input is pretty neat to see.
Yeah, we want to hear folks' ideas. We want to hear your thoughts, questions that you might have. So I'm seeing one, amenities, making sure that everyone has access if they are public as well. So space for outdoor dining and seating. So I think lining up with that open space consideration
Yeah.
as well. And maybe some of those features that then are also part of that open space, I think, with that dining and seating component. Let's see if there are other things coming in.
And Christian, not sure if you mentioned this already, but the input that's provided here, we're obviously capturing, but this isn't the end all be all. We have so many other ways for people to provide input, not just
Yes.
tonight, but even after tonight.
Yeah, and I'll make that plug right now. We'll make that plug at the very end as well. But again, we know that folks can engage in these meetings in different ways. If there are things that you'll rather send us via email after the meeting as a comment, or again, as that plug I made, we'll be in person on Saturday, and you're like, I have some thoughts. I want to share them in person. We'll be there as well. So there are multiple ways for you to share feedback, whether it be Mentimeter right now, via email, the project website, being there with us in person. So yeah, I think that is Kathy. Thank you for highlighting that. This is something that um, the door for input is not closed, is definitely open, and we want to make sure that we're hearing from you. So I'm going back to our Mentimeter just to see what else is coming in. So I did see some trash cans would be good, benches for sitting, and I'm not sure what the other word is. Implants, I believe. Sitting implants. Don't like driving around the newer multi-story buildings that are so close to the sidewalk and road. Feels and looks very overbearing when going past. So a little bit of that experience from, I was going to say pets, but for drivers as well. So thinking of that
Yeah.
consideration.
Yeah, whoever wrote that comment, know that that will be definitely addressed. So, in a few ways. So setbacks, for example, I
Yes.
mentioned the front setbacks. That's sort of the issue that we're trying to mitigate here. So set back enough from the street that there is this a bit of relief, space of relief, but also a space to maybe widen the sidewalk or add some street trees. And then there are other techniques that we can use, methods that we can use to make the buildings feel less overbearing. So, step backs is another one where not the whole building setbacks, but just like upper floors step back. So there are a variety of methods, just so everyone knows that we're considering to incorporate in the objective design standards.
And then I see one more question, and I think this is an example. So the Woodlands in Houston does this well in terms of hiding the buildings with landscaping as a good example. So Kathy, I think we'll take note there of like of a visual reference. I think that folks are sharing here.
Yeah,
Also seeing the use of area of colors, paint, landscape, and decorative items so that it doesn't all look the same. So again, I think a little bit of that combination of objective design standards, a little bit of how it looks and feels,
yeah,
with that the use of color and landscape as well. So,
yeah. These are great, guys. Thank you so much for submitting.
so I think we can move on to our next bookend, which is a little bit of again that moment for additional questions, feedback. Um, You can add it in the chat. You can add it to the Q&A pod. Any things that you're thinking about. So we'll take a moment here and see if anything has come through. And I'll ask our team to see if any other
And
notes have.
I know we're coming up on the hour here, but we do have one more category of
Yes.
those zoning regulations. So for those of you that have stayed on with us, thanks.
There was a question about the mixed-use overlay district and its compatibility with the City of Redondo Beach case. I was going to handle that after our zoning code amendments discussion. Um, and I'm just waiting to see if anything else pops in that's kind of about a broad topic like that before moving on.
Thank you, Michelle. Yeah, I think if not, then I think we can put a pin on that. And I think Kathy you'll be able a little bit of a over about the zoning code amendment itself, and I think we can
Yeah.
definitely touch on that question in a moment. So I'm not seeing any other questions, so maybe Kathy, if you want to take it on, let's go
Yes.
into zoning code amendments, and then Michelle, I think we'll hand it over in a moment.
All right. So the last bucket is the zoning code amendments. So zoning code amendments are simply that. They're amendments or they're updates to the city zoning code. And in this case, the city is making a variety of updates, mainly in order to comply with state law. So on the next slide, we show you a list of some, not all of them, but some of the zoning code amendments that the city is considering here. If we can go to the next slide. So for example, updating the definitions section of the zoning code. So here it's because the city's adding or clarifying certain definitions of like housing types, for example. The next one, the city is now allowing for a more straightforward review and approvals process for multifamily projects. So the goal here to make it, again, less confusing, more straightforward in terms of what is required and who is reviewing. The city is also updating parking requirements. So in this case, to comply with state law, um, the existing requirement to add parking for bedroom additions in single family homes, that's being removed to comply with state law. And there's also slight modifications to parking requirements for multifamily projects. Also in line with state law are targeted updates to the provisions about motel conversions and parking for emergency shelters. So all in all, to comply with state law. The city is working on other zoning code amendments, some of which, as I mentioned, is not listed here, but they are still in the works and they'll be coming out soon for review. And I think that is the last bucket. So I don't know
Yeah,
if folks have
so
questions here.
yeah, so I think Michelle, you had that question. Michelle, do you want to jump in on that one?
Yeah, I can go ahead and get started on that one. The question was, is the mixed-use overlay district going to clash with the new commune DTLA versus City of Redondo Beach case? So for folks who are newer to that situation, in October of 2025, a Court of Appeals published an opinion that an overlay can only be used on housing element sites if it requires a minimum of 20 units per acre and 50% residential development. But this is specific to housing element sites only. So the city has proposed one section of the MOOD that is specific to housing element sites. And in that section, the MOOD is designed to comply with that court opinion. It will require a minimum of 50% residential use and a minimum density of 20 units per acre. But here in Costa Mesa, we also have like almost 1,000 Measure K sites, and most are not within the housing element. So there's really two moods that we're looking at. One is the housing element sites. Those have to follow really specific rules. The other mood that would apply to non-housing element sites, we've got room to be more flexible. And for those areas, that's where we're looking to just add opportunities for housing development. And we would not be requiring a minimum of 50% residential. So I hope that clarifies things. And if not, please shoot me an email at neighborhoods@costamesaca.gov.
And I'll ask our team to add it to the chat. So I'm looking at our Q&A pod to see if there are any other questions coming in.
Okay, I see the question, will any Measure K site become a housing element site? We recently received a request from 2 property owners to have their Measure K sites added to the housing element. And it happened to be at a time in which we are reopening the housing element. So we will be looking into those situations where some Measure K sites want to be added to the housing element. So that's something that could be happening, yes. If you know of any sites that are Measure K sites that want to be added to the housing element, perhaps the owner feels really passionate about affordable housing, it'd be great to get them in touch with this team so they could email neighborhoods@costamesaca.gov.
We have that email in the chat as well for folks.
Thank you.
Thank you, Michelle. So I'm going to ask our team to move us, and it's going to feel very similar, but off to the next screen, which is our other questions. So anything, we've covered a bunch of different topics today. We started off with our mood. We moved over to objective display standards, and then we kind of just wrapped up with the zoning code amendments. And so this is kind of an opportunity, I think, to just gather any other questions that folks might have. You can add them in the Q&A pod. You can add them in the chat. We want to have, be able to respond to as many of the questions as we can. And then anything that we're not able to answer to, then we definitely want to be able to follow up with you individually and answer those questions. So we'll stay here for a second.
Okay, I'm seeing a question still about the 2 moods. And so more clarification is needed. So housing element law, including this new court opinion, means that we need to have very stringent standards on those housing element sites. And we wouldn't want to apply those standards to all of our Measure K sites. The Measure K sites are commercial and industrial in nature. And so if we would apply the requirements for housing element sites to all of those properties, they would all be required, if they were to pursue new development, to have 50% housing. And so there isn't a need to go that far. We only have to do that on our housing element sites, but we can still provide some additive opportunities where a property owner of a Measure K site that isn't a housing element site will just have the option to build housing if that's what they wish to do.
Thank you, Michelle. So again, folks, you should be able to submit any questions in the chat or our Q&A pod.
Okay, I see a question about selecting sites on Harbor Boulevard and that they're concerned about congestion. We are hearing about traffic quite a bit. Back when the city was developing Measure K, they had heard from the community, there had been extensive outreach, that the residents did not want to upzone their existing residential areas. So the city started looking at non-residential areas. And where you see a lot of that is along our major commercial corridors like Harbor Boulevard, and areas north of the 405, some of the numbered streets, parts of Bristol, etc. So you will see a concentration of those Measure K sites along some of those major commercial corridors, and that was to prevent the increase of densities in our existing residential neighborhoods.
Thank you, Michelle. See another question. I'm gonna read it all. So, will you be discussing Randall Preserve? Michelle, I think that might be a question for you. It's a little bit broader.
Yeah, so thank you for that question, but we are only looking at Measure K and housing element sites as part of neighborhoods where we all belong. We won't be looking at Banning Ranch, which is now known as Randall Preserve. That's outside of the scope of this project entirely.
We're seeing more questions come in, so we're like trying to sort these out really quickly, folks.
There is one question, maybe I can read it off. Any idea of how long it will be before more multi-story housing will be available in Costa Mesa? Are builders ready and waiting? FYI, if it is too early in the process, you can skip this question for now.
I don't think it's too early in the process. We do have folks who have been waiting for the housing element rezoning and waiting for Measure K rezoning. They own properties that have been in need for reinvestment, and they've been waiting for these opportunities to make the investment worth their while. But how long it will take for them to construct is something we can't predict. There's a lot of components included in construction. They have to go through their design phase, their permitting phase, and then the actual construction itself. But I can say we have a lot of interest, and we're fielding a lot of calls from property owners themselves, developers, their brokers, and so on. So there's just a lot of interest in Costa Mesa right now, including from some people who've had these properties in their families for a long time, and they're excited to see some change. So, we're hopeful that you'll see units within this planning period, but we just can't predict how long a project will take to come to fruition.
Thank you, Michelle. I've seen a follow-up to our harbor question. So the question is, just a block or two off harbor itself is filled with each commercial. Are these sites, are these eligible sites instead of directly on harbor? So.
Okay, so in some areas off of harbor, there are some Measure K sites that are not directly on harbor, but for the most part, they're directly on the commercial corridor. And those sites were selected years ago and passed through a ballot initiative by the voters of Costa Mesa. So at this time, we're not proposing to change the location of Measure K sites.
But for folks interested in really zooming in to these sites and seeing where they are in the city, we mentioned earlier, we do have an interactive map on the project website, so CostaMesaNeighborhoods.com. You can click on the map and you can zoom in and out. You can see some more information about each of those sites.
Yeah, if you go to CostaMesaNeighborhoods.com and select About, one of the options is Where. So select Where, and that map will pop up, and you'll be able to really zoom in and see where we're talking about.
Then I'm seeing another question. I think this is regarding senior housing. So the question is senior housing over age of 65 going to be built? So I think there's a little bit of that kind of follow up on construction itself, but Michelle, maybe it goes over to you.
Sure. Thanks for that question. Senior housing is something we want to see in the city. And we actually had a project get approved last year for senior housing, but it's not 65, it's 55 and over. So some of you may be surprised by that, like I was. But yeah, Costa Mesa is subject to the same laws as other cities in which we all, encourage and facilitate senior housing. But what we haven't done is identified on a map where it should go. It's up to the property owner if they wish to pursue a product that's more general or a product that's specific for seniors.
Michelle, if I can piggyback off of that, one of the goals of this effort is to allow for a variety of housing types, and to do so, that's why there are sites across the city, sites of different sizes, sites of different conditions. So hopefully that paired with the regulations that we will be preparing, which allow for flexibility, give property owners sort of the flexibility to not just focus on one product or one type, but we may start to see a variety of different types.
I've seen one more question, I think, on Harbor. So can you give a brief on how much the population is expected to grow on Harbor and how will traffic will be managed?
Great question. So we are preparing an environmental impact report, but at this time, I don't believe it's broken down population growth in terms of streets. Um, they're looking at the development potential on housing element sites and measure case sites in a broader sense. We don't know which sites will develop first, and we don't know if all of them will develop either. But I do know that in Costa Mesa, when we have our new development projects, they are subject to a traffic impact fee, which the city uses to make transportation improvements. And then the environmental impact report would also establish some mitigation measures to help offset some of the potential impacts of, just more residents in our community.
Michelle. So again, I'm going to ask folks if you have any other questions covering any of the other topics that we shared today, do add them in the Q&A pod or in the chat to any of our core team members here. And again, I think Kathy noted it earlier in the meeting. If you rather send a comment in via email, compile your feedback, that is also welcome. I think the email's listed on the chat, so you could always send that email with your comments. And again, plugging in Saturday, we'll be there in person. I'd love to see you there in person again. That is also welcome. So we'll get
Christian, I
those.
just saw
Yeah,
one about tiny houses.
yeah, yeah.
I wanted to address that. So, Neighborhoods Where We All Belong is really looking at this bigger picture, but we have in California, there's statewide accessory dwelling unit laws that the city is complying with. So, we are seeing development applications in which there are condos or townhomes, and they include a junior ADU or an ADU. But in general, this project, we're looking at much larger development projects, but that doesn't prevent or prohibit those projects from including something small like a junior ADU. I think we're going to see a lot more of that in Costa Mesa's future. We are tracking the trends and what types of housing proposals we're seeing, and there's been an increase in accessory dwelling units. And coming up soon, our city council will be looking at our annual progress report, and that's when we'll be releasing some of that data. So stay tuned. I believe it's the March 17th, 2026 City Council meeting.
Thank you, Michelle. So I'm seeing another question, and this is a little bit more for the engagement team, I think, asking if we're going to be posting the presentation on the website. So I know the recording will be posted. I believe the presentation will also be posted. So again, the project website should be in our chat right now. Neighborhoods. I'll ask Juan again to maybe drop it in there. And then if you'd like to see part of it, and I know Michelle, I think at the beginning of the meeting you highlighted some of the stuff we've done as part of round one. If you go to get involved, at the top of your menu, you'll be able to see the past events or upcoming events, and then that'll be able to help you navigate to whether it be a past presentation or the current presentation. So once we have the presentation recording available, it'll be posted up there. So anyone can go back. If your neighbors maybe were not able to attend, you can just share it to them, send it to them. They can send their feedback as well.
And Christian will most likely send an email blast,
Mhm.
just making that announcement so that everyone knows. So be on the lookout for that.
Yes. And again, this is an open door in the sense of we're gathering your feedback, want to make sure that we're as available as possible. If there are questions that come up after the meeting that you'd like to send our way, do send them our way. We want to make sure that we're hearing from you and clarifying anything that we can as part of this process, especially as we're kind of going through this right now. So I'm not seeing, I think I'm going to ask our team to see if there are any other questions that they're seeing that I might not be seeing. Um, I don't see anything on my end. I think all the questions folks have asked have been answered.
If that's the case, then I'd like to give a brief update on the next steps in our process.
Yeah. So I'm
Okay.
going to ask our team to move us forward. And Michelle, I think we're going to hand it off to you then.
Okay, great. So we have a draft mixed-use overlay district that's just for the housing element sites and some targeted zoning code amendments specifically to comply with state law that are going to be reviewed by the City Council soon, March 17th. But there's so much more to neighborhoods where we all belong because we also have so many non-housing element measure K sites. So we're here today still collecting public input on what the community wants to see on those non-housing element measure K sites and also objective design standards that could be citywide. So after thinking through input from this phase of outreach, we'll be publishing public review drafts of development and design standards well beyond those housing element sites later this spring. And we'll also continue the environmental impact report and expect a public review draft to be released mid to late June. And if you have not already signed up for our email list, please do so using the form at costamesaneighborhoods.com or email me at neighborhoods@costamesaca.gov. And I have to mention our upcoming workshop. Please tell your neighbors that on Saturday, March 7th, the city is hosting an in-person workshop at the Senior Center from 10 a.m. to noon. The in-person workshop has the same data that you saw tonight and the same questions that you answered. However, the format of the in-person workshop is different because we'll do a very brief presentation and then all of the attendees will go from station to station, looking at the boards and reading what you learned about tonight and responding to questions with stickers and Post-its and writing different notes about what they want to see. There will also be free snacks, children's activities, and Spanish interpretation. And next slide. So with that, we are just so thankful for your participation. Please stay involved, stay engaged. If you have other questions, please reach out. Thank you so much for being a part of this effort to shape the future of housing in Costa Mesa.
And with that, I believe that closes our meeting. Thank you everyone for being here. We will hopefully see some of you on Saturday.
Yes, see you then.
Thank you,
All right,
everyone.
folks. Thank you all. Good night.
Thank you.